DC The Voice, Alabama Prisoner Profiles. What's going on with y'all, man? Look, man, long time no see, man. Make sure y'all continue to interact with the videos, stuff like that. All the long time stuff y'all know what's going on back like never left, right? Now, here we go. Regret to inform the real fans that Pitbull is locked up again. Super shocked, super sad. We're all super pissed, you know what I'm saying? Well, I'm not too pissed because I've came to terms like this is just how folks is. He's not gonna learn, so he didn't already. They see I'm in here doing push-ups, getting ready for this DLC. Like, if we figure it's 50-50 whether or not he's probably gonna go, it'll be for like possibly 2-3 years. He doesn't have any new cases. Just, you know, this is his second violation thing on this one. So I didn't call. He didn't have me call his probation officer and shit. She done told me Mr. Whoop-de-Wop should know what we are going to recommend in court. So his court date is the 20th. So we'll see how that goes. I'll keep y'all updated on that. But here already. Yeah, tell them goddamn folks, goddamn, I'm in here. I got the good content, shit like that. Tell them go here. I need some money on the books, DC, whoop-de. So y'all do with that what y'all will, man. Y'all know what the Cash App is. Now, I want to kick this back off. If I'm not making content, I'm watching it. And I'm constantly documenting ideas for content and shit like that. So I want to kick this back off, going back to the drawing board with some of these instances of excessive force outlined in the government's complaint against the state's prison system. Let's hop right into that right now. All too often, correctional officers use force in the absence of a physical threat while making no effort to de-escalate tense situations. Such uses of force heighten tensions in already violent and overcrowded prisons. Failing to de-escalate these situations properly endangers the safety of prisoners and staff. Correctional officers also use force as a form of retribution for the sole purpose of inflicting pain. Such uses of force violate the Eighth Amendment. Number 1, correctional officers use excessive force on prisoners who are restrained or who are compliant. Using force on a restrained or compliant prisoner who is no longer resisting or presenting a danger is unconstitutional. Correctional officers' use of this kind of unlawful force is a pattern and happens too frequently in Alabama's prisons. The following are just a few examples of those types of unconstitutional uses of force that we've identified during our investigation of Alabama state prisons for men. In September 2019, a lieutenant adventurous lifted a handcuffed prisoner up off the ground and slammed him onto a concrete floor several times, knocking him unconscious. The prisoner was unable to breathe on his own, was intubated, and taken to an outside hospital where medical personnel administered CPR several times to keep the prisoner alive. In February 2019, a correctional officer at Elmore Correctional Center saw 2 prisoners jump a fence to retrieve contraband, stopped them, and took them to an office where 3 other correctional officers were working. A lieutenant in the office handcuffed the 2 prisoners and took them to an observation room across the hall from the office. A sergeant left the office to watch surveillance video of the fence jumping and became enraged when he saw it. The sergeant returned to the office, got a key to the observation room, and went into the room where the handcuffed prisoners were sitting quietly. The sergeant pulled one of the handcuffed prisoners off the bed and into the hallway between the observation room and the office. The sergeant shoved the prisoner against the wall and knocked him to the floor. The sergeant punched and kicked the prisoner and then struck the prisoner with a collapsible baton approximately 19 times in his head, legs, arms, back, and body. During the assault, the prisoner shit on himself. Throughout the beating, the prisoner did not resist and posed no threat. The sergeant then pulled the second handcuffed prisoner into the hallway and shoved him against the wall, striking him with a baton 3 times in the head, legs, and back. When the prisoner slid to the floor, the sergeant continued striking him, landing blows to his arms, legs, and abdomen. He also kicked the prisoner as he lay on the floor. 4 other Alabama Department of Corrections employees, a lieutenant, 2 correctional officers, and another sergeant watched or were in the immediate vicinity of the beatings but failed to intervene, either verbally or physically. The sergeant who assaulted the prisoners later filed a false report about the incident. The sergeant and 2 correctional officers pleaded guilty in federal court to 2 counts of willful deprivation of constitutional rights under the color of law. the lieutenant was indicted for failing to intervene. In December 2018, a correctional officer brutally hit, kicked, and struck a handcuffed prisoner with an expandable baton in the Ventress medical unit. 2 nurses saw the officer beat the prisoner, and 2 other nurses could hear the beating from adjacent rooms. The prisoner did not antagonize the officer before the beating, and his hands were handcuffed behind his back. During the beating, all 4 nurses heard the officer yell something to the effect of, quote, "I am the Reaper of Death. Now say my name," unquote, and the prisoner begged the officer to unalive him. At one point, a nurse observed the officer place his palms against the wall and his right foot on the side of the prisoner's face to grind the prisoner's head into the floor. The nurse intervened, and the officer briefly removed his foot from the prisoner's head. When the officer tried to step on the prisoner's head again, the nurse sternly told the officer to calm down. The officer then paced the floor with the prisoner's blood on his clothing, and before leaving the medical unit, told the healthcare workers that they didn't see anything. The officer filed a false incident report stating he did not hit the prisoner. The body chart and photographs, however, documented clear swelling and abrasions to the prisoner's back and left arm, a bloody nose, and a gouge to his left shin. After an investigation, I&I concluded that the use of force was excessive and unjustified. I&I questioned whether the employee was fit for duty after the officer claimed he suffered from an undiagnosed PTSD disorder. Despite I&I's conclusions, we saw no indication in the documents the department provided us that I&I referred the matter for criminal prosecution or the department imposed discipline. In July 2018, while being transported to the healthcare unit at Staten, a prisoner taunted a correctional sergeant by sticking out his tongue. The sergeant punched the handcuffed prisoner in the face with a closed fist. I&I concluded the sergeant used unnecessary and excessive force and failed to file an incident report. Less than a year later, the same sergeant was arrested at the prison for attempting to smuggle contraband drugs into the facility. In April 2018, 2 prisoners received care at Ventress's healthcare unit after being involved in an altercation. As a correctional sergeant was taking one of the prisoners to the restrictive housing, the prisoner ran away and knocked on the door of the administration building. The sergeant and an administrative employee caught the prisoner and handcuffed him behind his back. When they reached the restrictive housing dorm, the sergeant and administrative employee both struck the prisoner in the jaw while he was still handcuffed. The prisoner began bleeding profusely from his mouth and was escorted back to the healthcare unit where the same nurse treated him. The nurse noted that the prisoner had more significant injuries than earlier and noticed a bone fragment protruding from the prisoner's gum. The department subsequently terminated the sergeant for the use of excessive force, among other things. In September 2017, an officer at Ventress sprayed a prisoner with a chemical agent as he masturbated in front of the officer and refused to stop. Regardless of whether this initial use of force was reasonable, what followed was excessive. Officers took the prisoner to the medical unit in handcuffs. Before they entered the unit, the prisoner began thrashing and gyrating his hips, so an officer dumped a cooler of water and ice on the prisoner. The nurse advised the sergeant that dumping water and ice on the prisoner constituted a fall hazard and could also cause the prisoner to go into shock if he had a fever. The prisoner was then taken to the medical unit where he continued to thrash and gyrate his hips. The nurse believed the prisoner was unable to control his actions because he was under the influence of an illicit substance. The prisoner then fell from the examination table to the floor as the nurse tried to obtain vital signs. The first sergeant threatened to unalive the prisoner if he did not control his movements. While thrashing, the prisoner struck the sergeant's boot. In response, the sergeant kicked the prisoner several times in the stomach and chest. Another sergeant then took a shoe and hit the prisoner multiple times in the genitals. I&I investigated and concluded the first sergeant had used excessive force. The second sergeant, who observed much of the interaction, falsely denied striking the prisoner. I&I found excessive force occurred and closed the matter after both sergeants were arrested for other offenses, including smuggling contraband, and were no longer employed by the department. In August 2017, a prisoner in Limestone threw a cup of water that was likely urine at an officer through the tray door of a cell. The officer sprayed a chemical agent into the cell through the tray door and closed it. A captain and lieutenant responded to the scene, and the captain was eventually able to handcuff the prisoner without incident. As the captain and another officer were taking the prisoner for a medical assessment and decontamination of the chemical agent, the prisoner pulled away and moved toward the original officer. The original officer pushed the handcuffed prisoner and struck him several times. The lieutenant then restrained the officer. A captain investigated and recommended the correctional officer receive corrective action due to the inappropriate application of force. We saw no indication I&I investigated the matter. Based on documentation provided by the department, it's reasonable to conclude excessive force occurred when the correctional officer struck a handcuffed prisoner several times. In March 2017, an officer at Donaldson sprayed cell buster spray into a closed cell. Several officers then opened the cell door and ordered the prisoner to exit. The prisoner claimed he could not see and crawled out of the cell. One officer alleged as he entered the cell and attempted to handcuff the prisoner grabbed his legs. The officer then struck the prisoner with a baton several times. Photographs taken after the incident show at least a dozen welts or open wounds from baton strikes to the prisoner's back. The prisoner also had a laceration over his eye and a swollen hand. The prisoner claimed officers told him they beat him because they thought he was a member of a gang. While I&I promptly opened an investigation, they did not take meaningful steps to investigate until 2 years later. An I&I investigator found the correctional officer applied unnecessary force in the baton, given the presence of other officers. It's unclear whether the officer was disciplined. However, the officer continued to work at the same prison for years afterwards. In December 2016, at Bullock Correctional Facility, a prisoner asked the lieutenant for help, reporting several prisoners had threatened to stab him. The lieutenant took the prisoner to the captain's office. While talking to the captain, the prisoner raised his voice but was not aggressive. Without warning, the lieutenant grabbed the prisoner by the arm and the prisoner began resisting. The captain and lieutenant took the prisoner to the floor and eventually handcuffed him. The captain then shoved the prisoner's head to the floor. Several correctional officers also punched the prisoner in the back and choked him with a baton. The warden requested I&I review the matter. Officers falsely denied striking or choking the prisoner. Approximately 1 year later, I&I concluded the prisoner's allegations of excessive force were substantiated. It's unclear whether I&I referred the matter to a DA. Corrective action was initiated against the captain, but records provided by the department did not specify what type of action was taken. In December 2016, a correctional officer at St. Clair Correctional Facility opened a tray door to a handcuffed prisoner for escort to the shower. The prisoner stabbed the correctional officer in the hand with the prison-made knife. Back it up. He opened the tray door to handcuff a prisoner for escort to the shower. The prisoner stabbed the correctional officer in the hand with the prison-made knife. The officer stepped back and sprayed the prisoner in the face with the chemical agent through the tray door. He then secured the tray door and called for his supervisor. A sergeant arrived with another correctional officer at the scene and handcuffed the prisoner without incident. While the sergeant and other officers were escorting the prisoner to the healthcare unit, at least 6 other officers rushed towards the prisoner, screaming at the prisoner they would not be allowed to just be taken to the infirmary. One of the accompanying officers described the scream as, quote, a mob of officers, unquote. A lieutenant saw the situation and tried to intervene to calm the other officers. The sergeant ordered the correctional officers to stand down, stating, quote, it's over, the inmate is in handcuffs. The sergeant next felt a burst of chemical spray hit the side of his face, which caused him to turn the prisoner around and place him up against the wall. The sergeant instructed another officer to continue the escort and then witnessed 3 correctional officers tackle the prisoner to the ground before beating him with a baton and closed fists. The lieutenant also witnessed the beating and stomping of the prisoner while ordering everyone to stop. During the scuffle, the lieutenant was inadvertently hit in the thigh by one of the officers' batons. When the sergeant attempted to regain control of the prisoner, he was pushed back by one of the officers and the beating resumed. I&I investigated and referred the matter to the local district attorney for possible criminal prosecution. The documents the department provided the government do not show that discipline was imposed. So there y'all have it, man. Just a quick little whoop, you know what I'm saying? Checking out some of these instances of the excessive use of force by some of these officers outlined in the government's complaints. Some of that sounds justified. I don't know, you stab me, but I don't know, majority of that shit, you can see these folks is whooping ass often. You know what I'm saying? For the littlest shit, you know what I'm saying? They be like, I gotta show you I ain't playing, you know what I'm saying? Us versus them, gang shit. You see, they fuck that LT, we finna beat, bruh. Like, you done poke bruh in the hair. Watch out, LT, for you get it on, bro. Like, crazy as hell, man. But y'all let me know what y'all think about this in the comments section, man. Like, sub, share, cash app, PayPal, DC The Voice, Alabama Prisoner Profiles. Out the gate!